Chapter 10, Collecting What's Already There, Part 2. What are the steps for doing a content analysis? First thing is we want to clarify the research questions. And as we talked about earlier in Chapter 2, the first step in any study is to develop a clear research question or set of questions that you're trying to address. This can take multiple drafts and multiple maybe you need to go to do a lot of a literature review to kind of refine what you would like that question to be. But that is the first step, developing that research question. Step 2 would be choosing a sample. And the type of sample chosen is particularly linked to whether your research question is exploratory, descriptive, or explanatory. One of the key considerations when choosing your sample is to think about the population about which you want to draw your conclusions. To collect your sample, it's helpful, though not always possible, to have a complete list of the entire population about which you want to draw conclusions. And this is called a sampling frame. Okay, so your sampling frame, ideally you would like to test and measure everybody in the population. Content analysis typically relies on maybe a sample from that population. So a quota sample or a systematic sample are often what is used when doing a content analysis. The conceptualization and content analysis, and this is the importance of manifest and latent functions. So after determining whether you're going to use a quantitative or qualitative, or maybe you're going to use both. So if you recall from theory of sociology, manifest functions are functions that are clearly, obviously stated, but latent functions are sort of those unintended consequences to the function of what you're studying. So, for example, manifest content is content that is on the surface. It's obvious, it's clear, and that does not require much interpretation to code. But on the other hand, latent content is sort of those underlying meanings, and it's content that requires your interpretation. So for example, I believe your chapter has an example of Hillard, the sociology of sports. So if you're looking at manifest, on the surface, when is gender often used in the title? You can clearly see, it's obvious, it's stated, gender is in the title. But when it comes to latent, maybe it's more subtle. It's you're searching for that content in the text, how women and men may differ when they're faced with challenges within this subtle, more where you need to interpret those meanings. When it comes to operationalization and content analysis, you want to first of all develop a code book, and this is pretty good for any type of research, both quantitative and qualitative. But developing the code book, and the code book is what is a document that indicates numeric codes for each attribute or category of a variable in your analysis, as well as detailed directions about how to code each variable in the study. So it gives that background information to whoever's reading and interpreting your research, or even if somebody is working with you, so everyone is sort of on the same page. So when operationalizing variables and creating a code book, the categories should be exhaustive and they should be mutually exclusive. Exhaustive coding categories cover all the possible cases that apply to that variable. Mutually exclusive coding categories are ones that do not overlap. You want them to have separate, where they're not overlapping. And here we have, again, a sample code book in a content analysis. examining the sociology curriculum of a 2-year institution. In many cases, we develop a coding sheet. So coding data for content analysis and calculating sort of intercoder reliability. Once the codes are developed and compiled into an initial codebook, the next step is to create this coding sheet. A coding sheet is a sheet of paper or electronic document like a spreadsheet in Excel or Google Sheets that records the results of your analysis. So the coding sheet is used in combination with the code book to record the data. And so usually you have both hand in hand. See, and you can actually see that it really looks like an Excel spreadsheet if you're familiar with an Excel spreadsheet. The importance of validity and reliability in content analysis. Validity refers to whether or not a variable is actually measuring what it is supposed to be measuring. And reliability refers to whether or not the study is repeatable. Can other researchers use the same methods, and would they come up with the same conclusions? The coding of manifest content typically has higher rates of reliability than coding of latent content. So for example, you can clearly see in a manifest, you can see times that gender is apparent in the title of reports. But the latent is more, dependent upon interpretation, and that could vary. Quantitative coding schemes often have higher reliability rates than qualitative coding schemes. Again, because you're quantifying and there are counts that are on the surface obvious and able to be interpreted and quantified, but the qualitative relies much more on interpretation. There is a tension between reliability and validity in content analysis. If you increase the number of categories, you increase validity, but you decrease reliability. To increase reliability, you would collapse categories, but yet at the same time, it would decrease the validity of your data. So you need to be careful in that sense. Intercoder reliability in content analysis is that extent to which different coders assign the same scores or codes on an item in the same way. And so, when I've worked with a team or a group on sort of a group project, comparing, how did, what was your reasoning and justification for coding something in a particular way? Are you seeing similar trends when your interviews are taking place versus another person's, or when you're looking at a particular artifact versus someone else looking at that artifact? And so you want to make sure things are being interpreted and scored the same way. When analyzing historical records, documents, and policies, there's a tendency to focus upon sort of a single policy. So rather than sampling, the researcher's goal is to gather the policy documents on a full population. The full universe of available materials is the population in that context. So researchers will approach sort of policy with 6 key questions in mind. Number 1, will the policy be effective? Number 2, will it have unintended consequences? And number 3, will it have different impacts on different stakeholders? 4, how much will it cost? 5, is it feasible? And 6, will different groups of stakeholders view it as acceptable? So this is when looking at sort of policies and interpreting and doing content analysis on policy.